Welcome into the WalterPicks Fantasy Show. I'm here with Sam and Seth. We're going all over the Commanders and fantasy football, everything you need to know. I am a Commanders fan. There will be no bias here. Fantasy football is a completely different game. Let's just go ahead and start it off going from the top to the bottom in the roster. We will start with Jayden Daniels, giving you kind of a breakdown of all these players from 2024. And then we'll go into our takes for what we think in 2025 and if we would draft or pass these players. You look at Jayden Daniels, my king. So happy to not have a quarterback that I have to worry about every week. Finishes at the QB4 last season, 22.5 fantasy points per game. A lot of that comes because of the rushing upside. He was the quarterback one in rushing yards last year at 54. That is insane. That is higher than some backup running backs. That's all I'm going to say. This year, he's going as a quarterback three pretty much across the entire board of our WalterPicks rankings inside the app, sleeper rankings, underdog rankings. I'll get into if I think that is good and a valid price later. But none of that should change realistically. He still has the team that he had last season, if not better. They do add Deebo Samuel, which we will get into as well. And we drop that down to Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler at the running back position. This situation is a bit polarizing for fantasy football. None of these running backs are really amazing. In the offseason, there were some talks about Brian Robinson not being with the team, possibly putting him in trade talks if they're going to draft another running back behind him. He finished as the running back 25 last season at 12.1 fantasy points per game. We have him going as the RB29 in the WalterPicks app, and that's pretty close to every other ADP, RB31 and RB30 in Sleeper and Underdog. But when you look at this backfield, I will get into Austin Eckler. It is going to be a committee. The way that it runs, they utilize two running backs. In real NFL terms, we're starting to see that a lot more, and it probably is the smarter option. In fantasy football, that is not what we want to see. You look at Austin Eckler, he's the RB30 from last season, 11.6 fantasy points per game. We have him as the RB33. A lot of sites have him way lower than that at the RB47 and RB49. And none of these running backs are extremely interesting, again, because it is a committee between the two. You also have Jayden Daniels being the number one rushing quarterback in the league. It's a low floor for me because both of these guys are splitting pass catching work. They're both splitting we saw Chris Rodriguez get in the red zone last year. We saw so many. This running back room is so deep. Like nobody has a solidified role in this backfield. Austin Eckler was dealing with a good amount of fumbling issues last year. So was Brian Robinson at times. Austin Eckler also had concussions. He's 30 years old. Then they go out and draft Krosky Merritt, who I like as a player. We'll see if he gets any run in the NFL season. But again, we saw Chris Rodriguez get run. We saw Jeremy McNichols have his Superman game during the season. So in this offense, the scheme that it runs, any running back in this backfield is going to be somewhat viable. It's just unfortunate that they both have to be split that way. I'll get into if I'm drafting or passing these guys later, as well as Seth and Sam in the show. But that's just a little bit of information for you. None of these guys really stood out in any aspect of fantasy football, and they're both going outside the top 25 running backs. So maybe there's a case there to draft them because they are going so low, and it is an elite offense. And the offensive line has gotten better, which I love to see. Protect my king, Jayden Daniels. And then we drop down to the wide receivers. And this might be a little bit of a hot take on what I think. I will dive deeper into that. Terry McLaurin, though, going as the wide receiver 16, or finished as a wide receiver 16 this year, 15.5 fantasy points per game. Now he's drafted a little bit lower, wide receiver 19 in the WalterPicks app and where we rank him. But he's going as a wide receiver 16 again in Sleeper and the wide receiver 18 in Underdog. In my opinion, this is a little bit too early for Terry McLaurin. We look at what he did last year. It was great. I'm so happy he has a quarterback now. 29% of his fantasy points did come from touchdowns. That was the second highest fantasy points dependent on touchdowns, only behind Jalen McMillan. If you remember the end to his season last year, it was 5 straight weeks with at least 1 or 2 touchdowns. So 13 touchdowns total for Terry McLaurin. And we know playing fantasy, that is the most volatile stat. You can't really predict a touchdown total. It's going to be fluctuating every year. That was 5 touchdowns over his expected for the season. And all of that happened. Great season, a ton of touchdowns, not any target competition. And he finished as a wide receiver 16. And now he's being drafted at pretty much the exact same price. And they add Deebo Samuel. So Terry McLaurin, to me, I'm a little bit hesitant to draft him because he's going so high, pretty much where his peak was last year. And you can't really expect the targets to go up a lot higher than what it was. Because you look at Deebo Samuel here, finished as a wide receiver 45 last year, 10.2 fantasy points. He was a disappointment in pretty much every aspect of football. A lot of people were hating on this signing. I think Deebo fits great for the scheme. Obviously, he's a screen guy. They can use him pretty much everywhere. Another reason that the running backs aren't as interesting to me because he can take the ball out and do anything with the rushing attempts. We saw that with Christian McCaffrey and the 49ers. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey is a different level of running back than these guys are, but he dealt with a lot of injuries. He should be fully healthy. He looks to be fit. I know that's a big thing for a lot of people if he's NFL ready. He was dealing with a decent amount of health issues last season, so I'm not going to take that away from him. Going as a wide receiver 41, that seems really low. Wide receiver 41, 40, and 39 across all platforms. Finished as a wide receiver 45 with not a great situation last year. We'll get into if Sam and Seth agree with that. And then we get into the wide receiver 3. And like the running back situation, there's a ton of options that could happen here. We have Jalen Lane, who they just drafted. We have Luke McCaffrey, which I've been hearing a ton of good things about in the offseason so far. They just brought in Michael Gallup from the Cowboys. We can't forget that. They have KJ Osborne that they got last season, Noah Brown, who is probably the primary option for the wide receiver 3 when he is healthy. He was dealing with a little bit of injury in camp a couple weeks ago, but they draft Jalen Lane. So Jalen Lane looks to be the top number 3. But then we've heard good things about Luke McCaffrey. I think there's too many options here and not enough passing attempts. This isn't a team like the Cowboys or the Bengals where they're going to pass 40 times a game and everybody's going to be somewhat fantasy viable. These guys are the first one out, essentially, because we do have Zach Ertz as the tight end 11 last season, 10.1 fantasy points per game. He had a good amount of red zone usage as well, 9.8% touchdown rate. That's good for the tight end 10 in that aspect. And we do have Ben Sinnott as well. Ben Sinnott is a guy that everybody was raving a little bit about at the end of last season. He never really did anything. Again, it goes back to that fact that not many rookie tight ends perform fantasy football wise. You have last season and the season before with Brock Bowers and Sam Laporta kind of proving that fact wrong. But maybe he could get a little bit more usage this season. But let's just start from the top. Sam, what do you think about Jayden Daniels this year?
Yeah, I think his ADP is right where it should be, and I feel pretty comfortable taking him at that ADP once Lamar and Josh Allen are off the board. I mean, the fact that he led the NFL among quarterbacks and rushing yards per game, man, I don't know how you don't salivate at that. He was built in a lab for fantasy football, and I was on this last year. This was definitely one of our biggest hits in the WalterPicks app last season. One of my biggest personal hits in best ball and in fantasy last season too, of just being really, really high on Jayden Daniels. Before last season, guys, it was a bold take to say that you would take Jayden Daniels over Anthony Richardson. And I mean, wow, how crazy is it that looks like a bold take just a year later? I mean, he was one of the most prolific deep ball passers of all time in college football. We saw that immediately in the NFL. And then on top of that, he is a Lamar Jackson-esque runner. I'm not going to go so far to give him that Lamar comparison yet because he's the best rushing quarterback of all time, but he literally averaged more rushing yards per game than Lamar as a rookie. So yeah, I think where he's going makes sense. He absolutely could finish as the quarterback 1 overall in fantasy. And if you can get him like half a round to a full round after wherever Allen and Lamar go in your drafts, I think that's a pretty good value. I like to sort of tether my QB strategy to where these first quarterbacks end up going in my draft. And I can feel pretty good if I get Jayden Daniels 10 plus picks after where someone else took a quarterback, a guy that can perform just as well as them. I still think Ertz is maybe a bit better value if he ends up going 4th over after Daniels. But yeah, I think where he's going makes a ton of sense and super exciting to see what he can do for fantasy in year 2. And I don't think it's unreasonable to just say, you look at this team, either draft Jayden Daniels or avoid the team. Like this might be a little bit like a Green Bay Packers situation too. You mentioned so many of these options, even deeper down the team that are somewhat intriguing. Like it really could be somewhat of a rotation here across the entire rest of the team. And in that case, you're just going to want Jayden Daniels. I think he's the safest bet definitely on this offense for fantasy.
For me, I worry a little bit that he's going to have that CJ Stroud sophomore season. I mean, he's so good his rookie year, but people didn't really know what to expect. So everyone's like, this offense is so simple, and it kept working. It kept working. It kept working. And I love the way he prepares as well. If you guys haven't seen that, he does a VR. He does like a VR of the game and like gets a bunch of reps in kind of like before the day even starts. And I absolutely love that preparation. I do think that's the way of the future because you can get some real-esque reps better than just like looking at film. And so I really love that.
There was just a report this morning that the Vikings have been doing the same thing with JJ McCarthy.
That's genius. It literally is genius. It's going to change the game. I love his dedication to the game. So that makes me feel like he may not regress. But I do think offenses, you look at the Eagles, you look at the Giants, look at the Cowboys. They need to stop Jayden Daniels if they want to win this division. They need to stop Jayden Daniels if they want to make the playoffs. And I think the Giants made some nice upgrades. Not that they're going to beat the Commanders, but I do worry slightly with this division that he may regress a little bit for his price. So I really haven't been drafting him much, but I do agree that if he hits again at this ADP, he could be a steal. And it's not very often you get a quarterback as the third off the board in the third or fourth round that could actually be a steal. So if you want to put your fantasy chips on the table in round 3 on Jayden Daniels, I don't hate it, but in my mock drafts, it hasn't been for me.
Yeah, and I agree with some of what Seth said. There is some truth to that. The defensive lines he's playing against in the NFC East is insane. Like, there's some very good edge rushers on pretty much every roster. So that's tough, and that is part of the reason why the Commanders went out and upgraded their offensive line for that exact reason. They saw Abdul Carter, like everybody is coming for Jayden Daniels. So there also is the argument that Cliff Kingsbury does have a little bit of a history with regressing as far as quarterbacks after the first couple years. So that's definitely not something just to knock off and throw away. I think the talent of Jayden Daniels is good enough to avoid that, but definitely a good call out by Seth. And then moving it down to the running backs, we'll kind of group these together with Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. Sam, what is your take on these guys in fantasy drafts?
Yeah, I'm definitely pretty nervous about both guys because, like you already mentioned, Avery, they're both going to play. Now, I can pull up the projections that we have here in front of us. I've taken some of both guys in best ball because I do think this offense is capable of producing pretty big totals. I think B-Rob is capable of scoring 2 touchdowns plus in a game, and I think Eckler is capable of 5+ catches in a game. So in best ball, especially on DraftKings where it's PPR, I'm willing to take them around their ADPs at times, but in season long, these guys aren't going to win leagues. They're not going to win leagues. And when I'm taking running backs, I want a guy that can score 10+ touchdowns, have a receiving role on a good offense. And we're going to need multiple injuries here for that to come to fruition. And even if Eckler goes down or B-Rob goes down, I don't think we just suddenly see one of these guys get this workhorse league winning role. So yeah, we have right now B-Rob for a 45% rush share, Eckler at 18%. And part of the problem obviously is Jayden Daniels. We have him up at 27% rush share, a metric he led the NFL in last season. And I don't want to bring this back to Daniels fully, but he had 3 games under 20 points last season. Every other game he was over 20 points, top 12 QB. If you were to just replace Jayden Daniels in your mind with Lamar Jackson in the same situation, like I don't think that's a crazy thought process to go through. And I think, yeah, he's firmly a top 3 QB, and I'm comfortable taking him where he's going. But yeah, the running backs, Eckler catches passes, which is exciting. But yeah, like you said, he's 30 years old now. He had like a pretty big role in the playoffs, and especially that last game. I think he had six targets in that last game. Like, we saw some real role for him last year, but he's not going to be the primary goal line back on this team. Chris Rodriguez, Jeremy McNichols are both still on the roster. They both played last season, and they drafted Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt in the 7th round, a really unique prospect that like didn't really play a lot in college, and he shifted around to multiple places. He's coming out. He's over 24 years old already. He averaged 7.2 yards per carry in college. That's the 95th percentile. I think there's at least like a upside story here. We'll see if he makes the team. My bet would be on him making the team. But we've seen this coaching staff be willing to rotate a lot of guys, and I think he could potentially be in the mix at times as well. Not a guy I'm drafting, but a guy that makes me a little bit more nervous about both Brian Robinson and Eckler. So yeah, I'm pretty out on both these guys in fantasy, and I wouldn't be shocked if there's a 3rd or even 4th running back potentially mixed in here as well. Are you drafting either of these guys, Seth, in fantasy?
Yeah, I don't know if it's just today, but I'm feeling a positive about some of these guys, like Brian Robinson Jr. I mean, I do have him on my dynasty team, so there's like a little bit of a bias there, but he was RB25 last year, 12.1 points per game. This offense can allow him to continue to be pretty, I mean, he was barely not a running back too, barely. So if I don't get those running backs early, I mean, I feel like he's almost a must target in 0 RB, the type of guy that can hold the roster together if you went with 3 straight wide receivers and maybe an elite quarterback, maybe an elite tight end. This is the type of guy that I definitely would want for I'd feel comfortable tossing him in an RB2 slot if I did go with a 0 RB team. Obviously, the upside is not there. There's some league winning guys potentially in this zone that could, like the wide receivers in this zone, like Stephon Diggs. Love Stephon Diggs, Ricky Pearsall. There's guys I'd much rather take. But if I don't have RBs, Brian Robinson Jr. will probably end up on a couple teams this year.
Yeah, and that's the thing with the Commanders. You never know what to expect as far as the running back position. Again, they go out and draft a guy. They used 5 running backs got touches in the entire course of the season last year. But we dropped down to the wide receivers. You guys know my take on Terry McLaurin already. As As a Washington native, I want him to do great. As a fantasy perspective, I don't know if he can meet that ADP. Sam, do you think he meets wide receiver 18 value?
I think you put it perfectly, Avery. Like everything went right for him last season. He had over a 16% touchdown rate, was an absolutely perfect fit with the deep ball from Jayden McDaniels, and he still finishes wide receiver 16 in points per game. So yeah, I think he's getting drafted like a little bit close to a ceiling at this cost. We just sort of saw his ceiling last year. I'm really not too scared about the contract stuff. I imagine that will push his ADP down a bit because it seems like it could drag on pretty close to the season, if not like really right up to the season. It's super, super rare we see this stuff it actually extend into the season though. Like both the team and the player are really incentivized to have him out there week one. So I bet they figure something out, and I'm not too scared of that. But yeah, on an offense that's going to spread the ball around, he had a 22% target share last season. Is he really going to get much more than that this year? Probably not. We're actually projecting him up at 25%, which is above that and is still are behind his ADP here in the WalterPicks app because we have him at a 9% touchdown rate this year instead of a 16.2% touchdown rate, which is just not a sustainable pace of scoring touchdowns. So yeah, I'm out on McLaurin at his current cost. Definitely a ceiling here. I think he meshes well with Jayden Daniels, but we're drafting him at the ceiling he hit last year, not the floor that he could potentially have this season.
And for me, I think he has to be a 4th round pick for your team. And so that means in a 10-man league, I'd consider him where he's at as my 4th round pick. But he cannot be the 3rd player who joins your team with the running backs, wide receivers available in this range. So my leagues are all 12-man. I'm just not drafting him. But if I was in a slightly smaller league and he was my wide receiver 2, amazing wide receiver 2. I love the upside, love the story, love how many points this team scores. And I know that it may be a weird thing to say it that way because there's other good players around him, but I don't trust him enough on a week-to-week basis to be that 3rd pick off the board, which means for me, I'm probably out this year. Unless the contract, I'd love for the contract thing to go on because he dropped in value. I do like him, but unless he drops to the 4th round, he's not going to be on any of my teams.
Just looking quick at some of the guys going around him for some context. Right now, Breece Hall on underdogs going 1 pick later. I'm not even thinking about that. I know I keep bringing up Breece on this show. Amari and Hampton, I'd take him over Terry McLaurin pretty easily. To me, there's a way clearer path to win leagues with him than McLaurin. And then a full round later, we're staring at George Pickens. And who scores more points this season, McLaurin or Pickens? Who scores more touchdowns this season, McLaurin or Pickens? I think it's like a real debate that we could have. I mean, McLaurin firmly ahead of him in ADP. Most people would probably answer that McLaurin after last season. But man, I won't be shocked at all if that ends up being George Pickens and you're getting him at a much cheaper cost. Even like this Calvin Ridley, Jalen Waddle tier, to me, not that much different than what you're getting with McLaurin. And there's some actual league-winning running backs and potential league-winning quarterbacks and tight ends on the board too. With McLaurin going, yeah, 3rd round, I'm firmly out. And even in the 4th round, probably, depending on who's there, just a little bit too steep of a price, I think.
Yeah, and it's tough because even if you're a guy that thinks Jayden Daniels will take an even bigger leap this season than his rookie year, to be fair, that was his first year in the NFL. If he does improve, I still don't think Terry can improve that much fantasy-wise. Again, 29% of his points last year came from touchdowns. He's not going to touch that this year as far as the touchdowns go, again, because we have Deebo Samuel on this team. We'll start off with Seth this time. Do you have an opinion on Deebo Samuel?
I think I'm drafting him. Honestly, I mean, like maybe it's like some nostalgia. I'm just a really positive person today, I guess. But I like Deebo Samuel. I think that he's got a lot to prove. He's actually getting paid a decent amount of cap hit, I guess, based on the contracts that I was looking up. I think that's part of the reason why McLaurin wants a bigger contract. But I think that at his price, this is a player that if he gets those manufactured touches, I mean, they probably don't want Jayden Daniels to run as much as he did last year. And Deebo Samuel's the perfect player to like his career is near the end. He's probably not as firm. Like I have to be a wide receiver because I want to get paid like a wide receiver. Like I think he's being willing to do it all to make an impact for this team and to show he's still an elite player. And for me at the price, there's no risk. And remember, there was a couple of years ago, Deebo Samuel was a top like first 3 rounds. Like he's got that kind of talent. I know that was on San Francisco, a little bit different team, but I do like Deebo Samuel at his price this year.
Yeah, if you just look back a few years, back in 2021 was the real season that Deebo like smashed. He was the wide receiver 3 in points per game, had 20.5 points per game. In 2023, just a couple years ago, he's at 15.2 points per game, wide receiver 16, right where McLaurin finished last season. And then last year was, really, really rough for Deebo. Struggled with some injuries. He had just 2 games over 20 points ended with just barely over 10 points per game last season. And yeah, for me, in best ball, I'm very, very glad to click on Deebo Samuel. He just has this very unique weekly ceiling that you just don't get at this range of the draft, where he could score a rushing touchdown, catch 2 receiving touchdowns. There's just not that type of ceiling for most players. I do think he's going to be a bit of a start-sit nightmare, though, in season long, so I'm a little less likely to take him there. I think his cost, though, is like about right. He's going around wide receiver 40. This is like round 6 to 9 range in most drafts. So you're getting him, maybe it's your first bench player and not even a guy you necessarily need to start. The weekly ceiling appeals me. The weekly floor is a bit scary. He's not going to be the wide receiver 1 in this team. This also, looking at Deebo, I know we just talked about the running backs, makes me even a little bit more nervous for the running backs too, because he might be a better version of Austin Eckler in this backfield, catching passes out of the backfield. They're taking some of that rushing work. So yeah, in best ball, I'm very in, because he could score 40 points in a week, and not many guys in the NFL can do that. In season long, I'm a little less likely, but I do think like that there's that photo circulating or the video circulating of him looking like Ben Simmons, a little overweight, like in the preseason. That doesn't scare me like at all. We're months away from the season. This is one of the best athletes in the NFL. I'm not too worried from that perspective. And if that continues to sink his cost, which it did, I think, sink his cost like a little bit. This type of stuff that's just, it's not news, but people are treating it like news, makes me more bullish. But yeah, in season long, he's not a guy I think you're going to be able to rely on every single week in your starting lineup. So I'm kind of splitting the difference here. Definitely in best ball in season long, I'll probably be fading him a bit more.
Yeah, and there is some truth to what Sam's saying about those pictures circulating, definitely dropping his ADP. He's always been a bigger wide receiver. Leave the man alone, That's what I say. But I think his wide receiver 40 value is perfectly fine. If he does, for some whatever reason, climb, maybe we revisit this, but I think his value right now is good as a wide receiver too. And there is some truth also to him being able to outperform this crazy in some weeks, again, with this offense, even if the passing volume isn't as elite as you'd wish it was. But dropping it down to this group of wide receiver 3s, I do want to touch on this very quickly. We'll start it off with the best ball mind of Sam and what you think about all of these wide receiver 3 options.
Yeah, part of the reason I love best ball is like you actually have to really think critically about these types of situations, because this is really where you can win best ball tournaments if you are right about the situation in these receiver rooms, or even willing to take stabs in a ambiguous situation. And I think this is a pretty ambiguous situation. First, let's talk about Jalen Lane. Our comp for him was Kadarius Toney. He's going to be like a direct backup to Deebo Samuel, and like a similar type of, get him in some screen plays. Really, really fast, quick guy, can excel after the catch. I don't think he's going to be fantasy relevant though in year 1. And if anything, he's like a good guy to be mentored by Deebo and maybe take on a role like that in the future. Luke McCaffrey was a guy that I was way too into last season. I was drafting him in best ball round 18 last year. Luke McCaffrey was a quarterback in college, transitioned to receiver. I believe he only played 1 college season at receiver, and then gets picked in the 3rd round of the NFL draft. This is the younger brother of Christian McCaffrey, who I have obviously an affinity for, and makes me like McCaffrey a bit more. I could see it here with Luke McCaffrey, just given the storyline, right? Last year was really the only second year of his life playing wide receiver, and he's in the NFL. So we get his 3rd year as wide receiver now, year 2. There has been some positive reports out of camp. He is really athletic. Like I can see him being a Julian Edelman type guy. Edelman also played quarterback in college and was a little slow to get into the NFL and produce. But yeah, I mean, last year was not a good sign. 2.1 points per game. He played all 17 games, but wasn't even on the field, in all 17 of those games. So we didn't see much from him in year 1, which is definitely not a good sign. But if there's anyone I was going to bet on for the high ceiling here, it'd be Luke McCaffrey. Noah Brown, though, is probably the best bet to be the wide receiver 3 week 1. And Noah Brown had a real role last season. He was the guy that caught the Hail Mary that ended the Bears season about halfway through this season. But Noah Brown, last year we saw 2 games over 10 points. He actually had a 17.5% target share across all the games that he played, like a real target share there for Noah Brown. But yeah, in season long drafts, there's just no way he's going to return value. In best ball, maybe. But yeah, to me, the guy I'm most excited about here is Luke McCaffrey. I think there's just like a potential unknown ceiling as a guy that's transitioning from quarterback to receiver over the last few years, has the McCaffrey bloodline and pretty good athleticism as well. And he was a 3rd round pick, decent draft capital. They invested in him, and reason enough to think he'll make the team and potentially have a role.
Seth, who's your number 1 in the group?
Oh man, well I'll tell you that I got my first ever box of sports cards last year, and the first auto I ever pulled was Michael Gallup. So I was actually kind of excited to see him come back and play this season. Not the most exciting. I did get a Sam Laporta auto in that box as well, so that was pretty awesome.
Nice.
But I think it's going to be. I think Luke McCaffrey is the best shot to have the, that role where if he can. I think being on the field in 17 games last season, that's a positive. But I think early on it's going to be Noah Brown. But if there's some injuries, if Deebo struggles a little bit, there could be some real wide receiver 2 value in this offense. I was going to ask you, Avery, weren't there games last season where the Commanders never punted? I think there was like two or three games.
There was a few.
And it's like, how can they get any better than never punting? So that's one of the things I look at some of the players we looked at with their ceiling. Can they improve? But this offense is so high powered that if you can get the wide receiver 2, especially in like a best ball league or a dynasty league, that could pay off. And I'd say Luke McCaffrey is the investment, a guy that if we could see him take a little bit of a jump forward for sure. And then by the end of the season, by fantasy playoffs, maybe someone you could plug into your lineup.
Yeah, and I do believe there was a game we won only on field goals as well. So I guess that just ties into what this offense can be. But yeah, none of these wide receiver 3s are going to be the wide receiver 3. It's going to be a rotation for the entirety of the season. Noah Brown, in my opinion, will start as that if he's fully healthy. But you're going to see Jalen Lane. I thought he was drafted a bit too early. There was some better wide receiver prospects, in my opinion. But Luke McCaffrey drafted him for a reason. Michael Gallup, they signed him this year for a reason. KJ Osborne's there. None of them are worth it. None of them are going to be a solidified wide receiver 3. But you drop down to Zach Ertz, who is going to be more or less the wide receiver 3 for this team. Great red zone threat. He is getting older, though, and that is something we do have to note. Turning 35 this season. Sam, does that matter to you?
Yeah, we on the projections team at WalterPicks, we've looked at Zach Ertz like probably for too many times in a row on our projections team's calls, because every time I look at him, I'm like, how are we ranking him this far ahead of where he's getting drafted? And then we look deeper into it, and we're projecting him to do worse, basically across the board: touchdown rate, yards per reception, catch rate, target share, and he still projects as a top 15, top 16 tight end. He was like sneakily really good last year. Let me just pull up some of the numbers for Zach Ertz. He finished as the tight end 11 in points per game. He was in the top 15 in catches, in receiving yards per game, top 12 in target share. He had the 6th highest air yard share too. Like, he was getting targets deep down the field, 10th in air yards per game among tight ends. To end the season last year, in the last game, that playoff game against the Eagles, 21.4 points, 11 catches for 104 yards. Like, this was what Zach Ertz did in the last game last year at 34 years old. It's going to be 35, like Avery mentioned, this season. But yeah, we saw, I think, 6 or 7 games over 14 PPR points for Ertz. He's going to be free in drafts. No reason to really think the role changes much, except for Ben Sinnott. And I do have a little bit of fear of Sinnott's role increasing. Sinnott played every single game last year, similar to Luke McCaffrey here for Sinnott, where he was a 2nd-round pick, pretty good prospect, but we often see rookie tight ends just not play a huge role. But he did play in every single game. Sinnott is like a pretty interesting, very deep sleeper to me, since we saw Jayden Daniels really like throwing to the tight end last year. If Ertz in his age 35 season misses any time, like, Sinnott might actually be a guy you can stream off the waivers, and a guy to me that long-term might have just higher ceiling than what we're seeing from Zach Ertz now, tethered to Jayden Daniels. So yeah, in Dynasty and in redraft too, if I punt tight end and Ertz ends up missing time, Sinnott is definitely a name I'm watching. I don't think he'll just take over Ertz without injury. But yeah, I think he's a fine guy to take, maybe an even deeper option than Ferguson if you go with Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland and you're going the 2 tight end high upside route. Like, it gives you somewhat of a floor here. But man, it's tough to get too excited about age 35 Zach Ertz at the same time. So I think he's fair where he's getting drafted. We're projecting him over that ADP, but he's not going to win you your league, but he might keep you afloat at tight end, at least at this cost.
And I'm in. I think I love Zach Ertz at the end of drafts. I mean, you look at what he did, especially the after the first 4 or 5 games, he was even better than tight end 11. He was just insanely good for someone that you got for free off the waiver wire. So I'm putting him almost in the must draft category this season based on my tight end strategy with Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, Tucker Kraft, getting Zach Ertz as kind of like your safety net. Like, this is the guy I'm going week 1, because let's say, he's going to be 35 at the very start of the season. I mean, the beginning of the year is where he should be the best. I mean, like, you go to the end of the year, maybe that's where he starts to feel worn down and they're getting Ben Sinnott some more reps. but especially to start the year, he can definitely be that transition piece because maybe you don't want to start Loveland week 1. Maybe you don't want to start Warren week 1. So I think Zach Ertz is the perfect guy to pick up at the end of your draft. And if things aren't working out, it's an easy drop. Didn't really cost you anything. So for me, he's ended up on nearly every single one of my teams.
And if we ignore the 2 games he played under 50% of snaps last year, I don't remember the circumstances there. He was over 10 PPR points in over 60% of his games. I mean, a pretty good floor at tight end for the last round for sure if he can reproduce.
Yeah, and I agree with Seth. He's going as the tight end 14 in the WalterPicks ranks, but when you look at sleeper and underdog, tight end 19 and 22, that's free. That is low. And for the role that he had last season, I'm taking him at that price. I do think Ben Sinnott will get some kind of involvement later down the line. I mean, we thought the same thing last year, but that's exactly why you need to be following a channel like this one, where we will be going over every single week the recaps, and you guys won't miss. If Ben Sinnott starts getting some more reps, some more snaps, you know where to go, and that is this channel right here. Will tell you exactly what you need to know. But let's start from the top and do a little bit of a draft or pass really fast before we end off the video here. Jayden Daniels, Sam, draft or pass?
Easy draft for me at QB3, especially if you can get him 10 plus picks after where the first quarterback's taken. I think that's a great value.
I don't want to get clipped here, but I'm going to say pass on Jayden Daniels. I've just taken other guys in that range.
Yeah, it is fair, at least in drafts that I do every single time. The first quarterback that goes, they all start going. Like, if one quarterback is taken in round 3, then there's going to be at least 2 more in round 3 before. So maybe he's going to jump up a little bit in ADP for that reason. I'm drafting Jayden Daniels, though. The rushing upside is always going to be there. The offense got a little bit better. And then what about Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler for you, Sam?
Yeah, I'm passing on both Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler. Don't see a league-winning ceiling here. Maybe some guys that can get you some usable weeks as you look for a league-winning ceiling with other guys, but that's just not the way I draft. So yeah, I'm not drafting B-Rob or Eckler this season.
It's a pass for me as well. I know I talked him up a little bit earlier, and he will end up in my queue if I end up with way too many wide receivers early as a guy I need to target. But if I can, in an ideal situation, he doesn't end up on my team.
Yeah, I like that, Seth. And I'm going to agree with the guys here. You have so many running backs in this backfield and Jayden Daniels. The upside and the floor is unpredictable. So for that reason, there's some better guys I'm taking. And then Terry McLaurin, as a Commanders fan, you would not expect me to be avoiding all of these guys in fantasy football, but I guess that's just the realistic guy in me. I'm not taking Terry McLaurin at his value, and I think you guys would agree, but let me know if I'm wrong. Sam, you go first.
Yeah, I'm passing on McLaurin at his cost. I hope the contract dispute gets people a little spooked, and we could get a slightly cheaper cost. But yeah, he finished wide receiver 16 last year with an unsustainable touchdown rate. That's where he's getting drafted this year. Give me George Pickens one round later for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to pass as well, and I'll also predict that he will drop back a little bit in ADP. I think he's going to fall when we start getting into draft season a little bit more.
That's completely fair. And then when we look at Deebo Samuel, I don't think he's going to extremely outperform his ADP. He's a fine value guy there for me. Sam, do you agree?
Was that draft or a pass, Avery? You can't be in the middle.
You're right. I'll draft Deebo.
All right, I'm going to go with pass on Deebo. In best ball, it's an absolute draft for me. And since I play so much best ball, sometimes I can separate these two things in my mind and just say, I got enough of him in best ball. I don't need to deal with him in season long with the start-sit headache that he might be. And I do think serious start-sit headache potential here with Deebo, despite the high ceiling. So yeah, I'm going to go pass with Deebo Samuel.
And I do like him, and I probably would draft him, but in a lot of cases, ideal situation, it's a pass as well. There's some really good running backs, especially the rookie running backs in this range I'd much rather have for my team because I see real league-winning potential. But if I am set and my team's looking good and I want to chase some upside, Deebo could be some upside there. So, but most likely pass for me.
Yeah, and that's a good point. A lot of the times it doesn't just come down to if I like this player or not. In fantasy, it comes down to your roster construction and also the opportunity cost that it takes to draft Deebo or any other player for that matter that early where they're going. All avoiding the wide receiver 3s here. There's too many mouths to feed in that aspect and not enough passing attempts to go around. And then Zach Ertz, I'm drafting at his ADP and then maybe pivot off that halfway through the season if he starts to regress.
Yeah, for me, Zach Ertz, everything in my body, in my soul says this is not a guy that should be on my fantasy teams. But then every time we've looked at this on the projections team, I've become more and more convinced that he makes sense at this cost, especially if you're going to pair him with someone else who has high upside. Again, we're projecting him to be worse in every single statistical category, and we're still like 6 or 7 spots ahead of his ADP across all these platforms. So yeah, I think he's a pretty easy draft as a second tight end with some other high upside tight end. So yeah, I'm going to go draft with Zach Ertz at his current cost.
Yeah, lock it in. Zach Ertz is a must draft for me, especially if you go late tight end. He's on all my teams.
And that is going to finish off the Commanders show for this one in fantasy football. Guys, make sure to be subscribed for the rest of the teams and the rest of the divisions coming up soon, and we will see you in the next one.